So for next time, you're reading just one of the John Keats poems. You're reading Eve of St. Agnes. Yeah, that is all you're going to have to worry about for Wednesday. I guess like before I get started talking about anything here, I just want to gauge your reaction to all of this. What did you think of these journal fragments?
So what do you think of these journals?
Yeah, these journal fragments, yeah. Okay, that's an expression.
I know a lot of this stuff happens in like the Grasmere journals.
Yeah.
Like most of it happens there.
They lived at Grasmere.
Yeah,
We'll talk a little bit about that. They lived at Grasmere longer.
Yeah. I really got a sense of how codependent the Wordsworth siblings actually were.
Okay. So can you give me an example of this kind of codependence here?
It's like an unhealthy, especially on William's wedding day. Like
Okay, yeah.
When they were coming back, when Mary's brothers were coming back to tell her that that the wedding was over, she just went upstairs and just flopped on the bed and just didn't want to see, didn't want to hear. She just was like tuned out for the rest of the world. I'm like, okay. And like how she was she wasn't necessarily reluctant, but it seemed as though she was reluctant that they were, I guess, dating, or that he was going to see her. Like when he went to see Mary that one time, and she was upset about it. But she said she was trying to put on a brave face. While
I will be well and I will look well. Yeah.
She's trying to coach herself to be okay. My brother was getting married.
And are there other ways in which these what else do we see about this sibling relationship here that maybe is less emotional in nature? What other sorts of things do we see her doing for him, or the two of them doing together?
They walked a lot, and then she had like all of her prose journals that it said like Wordsworth used a lot of her descriptions in his poetry.
Yeah. So she does. She records a lot of the things that they see on walks together, and then he uses her impressions to create a poem, right? So they are, she's kind of an unacknowledged partner in his poetic enterprise, right? And also who, does things like cook his meals and clean up after him and cut his pencils for him.
Dorothy.
Who takes dictation for him while he's composing.
Yeah. In a way, really enough, it's like she's his wife, like work wife, which is scary.
Well, and no, I mean like in a real sense, and not even necessarily in a sexual sense, right? And I think like one thing that we have to sort of keep in mind here is the ways in which Dorothy's horizons are limited, right? So the Wordsworth children are orphans. William and some of the other boys have some money they inherited, right? But what money there was went to the sons, not to Dorothy. So what does that mean for her as a middle-class woman in the early 19th century?
She's going to be dependent on her brothers regardless, since when they had the money, and the society at the time for women was not the best. And so it's not like she could be necessarily on her own.
Yeah.
Right.
And there probably wasn't a lot of money to do like a dowry, so her prospects were probably really limited.
Exactly. Yes. There were two things working against Dorothy in terms of marriage prospects. Right. One, no dowry. Two, she was also shy and socially awkward. So it's not like she was kind of putting herself out there at parties or things like that either, right? So up until William's marriage, right, she really is the most important woman in his life, regardless of anything else. So his marriage is a potential emotional disaster for her, because then what does that mean for her place in the household?
She basically loses her whole life. Like,
Yeah, she's displaced now, right? There's someone else, there's another female center of the household. And she's just gotta kind of suck it up and live with it, right? Because she is, I mean, she apparently, loves her brother, but is also dependent on him. So I think it's interesting to note, right, that the Wordsworths live at Grasmere until 1808. William gets married in 1802. Dorothy stops writing journals, as far as we know, right, in 1803. So it's not too long after his marriage that her pen seems to dry up, right? Now, we don't know why. But, I personally, find, the last sentence we're given here, which, by the way, is not the last sentence of the Grasmere Journals overall, right? But, I don't know, it strikes me as pretty, if we look on page 419, can I get somebody to read for us just those last three sentences, right? So it is Christmas Day.
It is Christmas Day, Saturday, 25th December, 1802. I am 31 years of age. It is a dull, frosty day.
So what do we make of that? I mean, for one thing, that this is all she says about this day.
I mean, it's her birthday, and she seems bored and sad and dumb.
In addition to it being her birthday, what else is it?
I mean, it's Christmas.
It's Christmas.
Yeah.
It's her birthday. And this all she can say about it is I am 31 years of age.
It's dull.
It is a dull, frosty day, right? I mean, I don't know about you, but I find this gutting, For one, what might be the significance of her age here? She's 31 years of age.
At that point, she would have been a spinster for years. I mean, if someone, if a woman was not married even by 23 or 24, people were ooh, they're getting up there. So,
getting a little long in the tooth, yeah, but no, you're right. Yeah, 31 is kind of definitively too old for a first marriage in, Regency era culture, right? This is. She is relegated now, to old maid status. And she doesn't even occupy the privileged place she once did in her brother's household. So, one can perhaps forgive her for, not having too much to say about this particular birthday, right? It's, things don't seem so great. But let's just kind of sit for a minute with just a couple of these incidents, right? So one of you pointed out when he's William is going off to visit Mary Hutchinson. If we look on page 413, can I get somebody? It's the Thursday, March 4th entry. Can I get somebody to start reading from before we had quite finished breakfast?
I can.
Yeah, thank you, Gil.
Before we had quite finished breakfast, Calvert's man brought the horses to William.
Mm-hmm.
We had a deal to do: pens to make, poems to put in order for writing, to settle for the press, pack up, and the man came before the pens were made, and he was obliged to leave me with only 2. Since he left me at 11:30, it is now 2, I have been putting the drawers into order, laid by his clothes, which he had thrown there, here and there, and everywhere, filed 2 months' papers, and got my dinner, 2 boiled eggs and 2 apple tarts. I have set Molly on to clean the garden a little, and I myself have walked. I transplanted some snowdrops. The bees are busy. William has a nice bright day. It was hard frost in the night. The robins are singing sweetly. Now for my walk. I will be busy. I will look well and be well when he comes back to me. Oh, the darling. Here is one of his bitten apples. I can hardly find it in my heart to throw it into the fire.
Pause there, right? Okay, now, that strikes us as fucking weird, right? Here is this trash that William left behind, before he absconded. I can barely bring myself to throw this moldy, rotten apple core into the fire to dispose of it, right? But what else does this kind of show us about like what kinds of stuff Dorothy does around, like what kind of like the center of her life is here?
She's catering to William, like life as a writer and a poet. Like she's having to, make the pen and put all the poems in order and go to the press. And like when the guy came to get the stuff that she had prepared. And
he's William is helping her before he leaves, but gotta go.
Yeah, and he just leaves. And she's left with the rest of it.
Yeah. And she's cleaning up after him too, right? He's just left his clothes all over the place. So she's cleaning up the house, putting his crap away. There's another point at which she's making a waistcoat, a vest for him, right? There seems to be a kind of clear divide in expectations here, right? That he is kind of free to leave and wander whenever he likes, and when he does, then she kind of sticks around and sorts things out, right? So let's think about this like just like the journal as genre here, right? So what kind of writing does one do in a journal? And how is it different from, like, say, writing poetry or writing writing pamphlets or fiction?
It goes by daily activity. That's what they do.
Okay, daily activity, and some of the things that you do in the day-to-day just aren't that interesting, right? Okay, so yeah, it's kind of based on the calendar rather than other considerations, right? What else makes it different from other forms of writing?
I mean, it doesn't necessarily have a structure. It's more just like free writing, like thoughts.
Yeah, if it does have a structure, like Peyton said, it's chronological, right? It's just day to day. What about in terms of audience? Who do you write a journal for?
Yourself?
Yeah, it's private writing, right? It's not necessarily intended to be read by anyone else. Though we know that William at least read parts of the journal, right? And so, crap, sorry, I forgot to silence this. Okay, there we go. Oops, sorry. Okay, so yeah, it's private writing. It's not intended for other eyes. And so, like, we can kind of see maybe a level of vulnerability in some of these journal entries that might not be expressed in other more public forms of writing, right? Like, for example, when she drops down on the bed catatonic when her brother gets married, right? She may be more honest with herself in the pages of the journal than she is with the people around her.
Like how she was saying that she was going to be like basically like put on a brave face once he got back.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure that's what she did. She didn't have a sour face when he came back from being married.
Yeah. And I think a lot of what we're seeing there is kind of like the way, it's a certain way of thinking about women's responsibilities as separate from men that was common in the 19th century. One of the articles on your bibliography goes into more detail about this, but it was called Vocational Philanthropy. And it was written about in various housekeeping manuals of the era. And so basically what the idea was is that men work out of necessity, right? So the labor that they do is necessary labor. chopping wood, milking cows, building barns or houses, right? You know, things of that nature. But women supposedly work out of love or care for their families and their neighbors. Now, what then does that mean about things like, say, compensation for work? If you are supposed to be working out of love for other people, what do you expect in the form of compensation?
Love.
Nothing.
Yeah, just
Return.
love return. Yeah, basically buckus, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not going to get paid for this. But you should do it anyway with a smile, right? And there's an expectation then of selflessness, right? That the ideal middle-class woman throws herself selflessly into this kind of labor. And must also continually try to improve herself in order to become a more loving wife, mother, neighbor, companion, right? This doesn't necessarily mean intellectual self-improvement. It means more like, you know, improvement of feeling, right? So we can see that a lot of this probably originates in some of that sensibility thinking. That was common in the late 18th century, right? This idea that opening ourselves up to sense impressions makes us more sympathetic by being able to imagine other people's experiences. And then that leads to benevolence and generosity, right? But yeah, the expectation here is that women in particular are going to be generous and be benevolent and not expect really anything in return. And I think that we see a lot of this principle illustrated in Dorothy's journals here. Were there any other moments in these journal fragments that struck you as particularly interesting or weird?
How
What
she
go
wore
ahead.
the ring on her finger.
Okay.
I thought that was a little.
Yeah. That's it's a little intense. Yeah. Yeah, and he puts it on her finger too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even weirder.
Yeah.
Didn't it like you put it back on her finger when he got it?
Yeah, she gives it to him, and he gives it back to her and puts it back on her finger, right? Let's look at page 418. Right. I gave him the wedding ring with how deep a blessing. I took it from my forefinger where I had worn it the whole of the night before. He slipped it again onto my finger and blessed me fervently.
Like, what do you mean by that?
Yeah,
Bless me
no, you're right.
fervently.
Yeah, it
What?
is. Yeah, it is very strange. But she's been washing his socks
Right.
and cleaning up his bitten apples and taking his dictation for the last 5 years, right? She may be his sister, but she has been functioning in the role of wife, particularly in this mode, really the entire time they've been living together, right? And she lives with William for her entire adult life, right, as a member of his household. Again, where else is she going to go, right? She is dependent on him. But yeah, so the first fragments here are written at Alfoxden House in Somerset. which is in kind of like the south. It's in southwestern England. I'll show you on a map where some of these places are in a moment. And they're there from July 1797 until June of 1798, so a little less than a year. It's near a village called Nether Stowey. And they moved to Alfoxden House because that was where, Nether Stowey was where Wordsworth's friend Coleridge was living at the time, and they were collaborating on the first edition of Lyrical Ballads. Now the larger group of journal entries comes from Dove Cottage in the village of Grasmere, in a region called the Lake District, which again I'll show you in a minute where that is. And they lived there from December of 1799 until 1808. Though again, the journals stop. In 1803. This doesn't mean that she didn't write more journals. We don't know if she did or not, but the journals that we have, the journals that the Wordsworth family preserved, end in 1803. And they're not published until 1897. So Dorothy and William are both long dead by the time these see the light of day. But apart from like getting past the weird and sometimes seemingly creepy sibling relationship, like, are there other moments here that seemed particularly strange to you? Whether it's odd things that they do or weird things that they run across.
When they were lying in the cemetery, like trying to listen to the people in the ground. That was weird for me.
Yeah. Can you take us there and read that passage?
Okay, I think it starts on page 415.
It's the Thursday, April 29th, right?
Okay, it says, after I had written down the tinker, which William finished this morning, love called. He was very lame, went into the kitchen. He came on a little pony. We then went to John's Grove, sat a while at first. Afterwards, William lay, and I lay in the trench under the fence. He with his eyes shut and listening to the waterfalls and the birds. There was no one waterfall above another. It was the sound of waters in the air, the voice of the air. William heard me breathing and rustling now and then, but we both lay still and unseen by one another. He thought that it would be so sweet thus to lie in the grave, to hear the peaceful sounds of the earth, and just to know that our dear friends were near.
Thank you. So I think we can probably pause there, right? Like, what? Yeah. So what's weird? Like, what are they doing?
Like almost playing dead.
Yeah,
I mean, they're lying in a trench with their eyes closed, just listening, right? And imagining what it's like to be in the grave. Now, I want to give you actually some context for this, because I think there is actually a relevant context for this that maybe explains some of this behavior, that it's not just that the Wordsworths are freaking weird. So it goes back to this whole sensibility thing, and one of the sources of this is Adam Smith's theory of moral sentiments. So Smith argues that when we feel sympathy for another person, it's because we're imagining ourselves in that other person's place, right? So essentially we are developing a kind of like good moral response out of what's essentially a selfish moral response, right? So for example, when we pity a dead person. Right? Smith specifically writes that, it's because we imagine how we would not like to be, in a pine box buried in the ground, unable to see or hear or move. Now, in some sense, this is like to pity a dead person, Smith argues, is completely nonsensical because they can't sense any of the things that would frighten us or would make us feel bad if we were buried underground, right? Their problems are over. But I think that what the Wordsworths are doing here is kind of like is related to that passage from Smith. And they're kind of like projecting this idea of awareness into, the idea of the grave or the life beyond. Right? They're trying to think about what it would be like to be dead, what it would be like to be a corpse lying in a trench in the ground. And they're finding something comforting in it, right? Rather than something terrifying. Right? Williams thought that it would be so sweet thus to lie in the grave, to hear the peaceful sounds of the earth, and just to know that our dear friends were near. Now, of course, again, part of Smith's point is that if you're lying in the grave, you don't actually know any of these things because you're no longer sensing anything.
Right.
But, this is a projection of the human imagination into the life beyond, right? So, I'm not really sure what to do with this exactly, and it's still a weird thing to do. But like as I was looking this over again in my office today, like I kind of thought about this and said, I think there's a clear connection here, right? That Smith wrote this a couple decades earlier, and I'm sure Wordsworth, having been university educated, would likely have been familiar with it. So, yeah, I think that's what's going on with that. So, any other particular passages that y'all want to talk about before I give you like a little bit more kind of physical context?
I found it interesting because it has like all the little notes with like all these little numbers at how many different things, both from Coleridge and from Wordsworth, that her descriptions were used in, and specifically that there was a connection between the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner and one of her descriptions in here.
Yeah, can you take us to that?
It's page 409 and so it's 7. So it was like a spider web connection because I went back through and I read it in the other one, but I noticed she used the word glittering a lot, and like it kept catching my eye because of the glittering eye.
Yeah.
But it said that she sat a considerable time upon the heath, its surface restless and glittering with the motion of scattered piles of withered glass and the waving of the spider's webs or threads. So that was the one that it had connected to the rhyme of Ancient Mariner.
Yeah, let's go to page 453 there for a second. And so it's connected. Connected to the sails of the death ship, right? That comes to greet the mariner and his shipmates. Right? So line 180. So, alas, thought I, and my heart beat loud, how fast she nears and nears. Are those her sails that glance in the sun like restless gossamers? Right. So this idea of glittering cobwebs. And I think it's probably safe to say that Dorothy is a kind of unacknowledged collaborator in the production of lyrical ballads generally. She's going on these long walks with her brother and with Coleridge. They're sitting up in the cottage late at night and talking over philosophy and poetry and things that they witness on their walks and processing it all into these poems. She just doesn't get any credit for the book, right? And there are basically two uses that scholars have made of these journals, right? One is insight into the origins of lyrical ballads, and also to some poems that Wordsworth and Coleridge produced after lyrical ballads. The second the thing that we get from it, and I think like this is the thing that people tend to use it for more often today, is that these are interesting in their own right as a record of the thoughts of a sensitive, intelligent middle-class woman. Of the early 19th century. And did you note, like, when we look at like her observations of, say the physical landscape, right? Did you notice any particular patterns in her observations? Or anything interesting about the observations that she makes? Apart from the fact that, yeah, they do get picked up and used in poems that her brother and Coleridge write.
I mean, she always mentions the nature of the day, or like the weather, or anything.
Yeah, she's really interested in weather, and particularly in extreme weather phenomena. What else? Are there other kinds of things that she tends to pick up on and notice?
There was one time when she saw like the lone leaf left on a tree, or like this other bush that was hidden underneath another shrub, and you're just like, how long are you sitting here to notice this?
Yeah, no, you're right. I think that's a good point. She has an eye for like the singular or the lone, right?
Or at one point she like counted the amount of cows in the pasture. It was like
42. So specific.
Yeah, a lot of sheep too. She talks a lot about sheep.
And birds.
And birds, yeah. Yeah, so she's clearly interested in animals, right? Also seems to be knowledgeable about plants, right?
Mm-hmm.
But she doesn't just say flower or bush. She like give the name of the flower bush she's talking about.
Yeah, she knows what they all are. I mean, I don't know half the time what the hell plant she's talking about. But she clearly does.
I think even in the ones where she didn't know what it was, she was like, perhaps it's this. And you're like,
Yeah, she had at least a good guess, right? Now, what about her descriptions of people? What kinds of people does she usually take the time to describe?
the destitute.
Yeah, usually it's people who are beggars, who are poor, who are injured, right? That she usually makes some kind of special note about, right? So yeah, people who are destitute, bereaved, or disabled. Right? She makes a note, for example, that old farmer who is driving a bull, but he's walking with two sticks, right?
I do remember thinking she was kind of classist and egregious when she, the woman with the two children. One was like, you can tell that one of the children like malnourished, like the 4-year-old.
Yeah.
She was carrying, and she said her and her brother were about to like get onto the woman about having a house-starved child, but then the woman told her that the husband had left her, and she was like basically like barely hanging on with having to like care for two small children. I can't remember what state that was on.
I think page 416, yeah. We parted from Coleridge at Sarah's Crag after having looked for the letters which C carved in the morning. I missed them all. William deepened the tea with C's penknife. We sat afterwards on the wall, seeing the sun go down and the reflections in the still water. C looked well and parted from us cheerfully, hopping upon the side of the stones. On the rays we met a woman with 2 little girls, one in her arms, the other about 4 years old, walking by her side, a pretty little thing, but half starved. The mother, when we accosted her, told us how her husband had left her and gone off with another woman, and how she pursued them. Then her fury kindled and her eyes rolled about. She changed again to tears. She was a Cockermouth woman, 30 years of age, a child at Cockermouth when I was. I was moved and gave her a shilling. So, yeah, this idea of accosting this, what dost thou here, woman with half-starved child, right? And kind of like making her give her story here, right? One of the ideas behind vocational philanthropy is that you're supposed to help the deserving, not the undeserving, right? There's this kind of like division of your neighbors and the poor in particular into sheep and goats. You help the sheep, you don't help the goats. Right? Because they're just going to squander it anyway. I mean, we see like this same kind of residual thinking in the way people talk about the homeless now, right? So if you give that guy $1, he's just going to spend it on drugs, and so on and so forth, right? So these ideas have a long history. And I think that there is, I think as you noted, Ryland, there's a kind of element of classism in it as well. What is it ultimately that makes her decide to help this woman?
That she was at Cockermouth when Dorothy was?
Yeah, they're from the same, or they lived in the same town. And they're about the same age. So she's able to identify on some level with the woman, so she gives her a shilling, right? So we see the workings here of that sympathy principle. This is someone who is in some ways like me. Therefore, it's fine for me to give her a shilling. It's fine for me to help her. So let me tell you all a little bit about where all of this is taking place. So I'm going to pull up a map here of England. I'm going to show you some pictures of villages. Who doesn't love looking at pictures of villages? Okay, so Alfoxden House, where the earliest journals are written, is down here. Somerset is down around here. So it's coastal, right? There's a point, where she talks about, seeing children at the beach, right? There are a lot of popular, kind of like seaside resorts in Somerset. So they move up to the Lake District, which is where Grasmere is, and Dove Cottage, where most of these entries are written. And the early wave of British Romantic poets are very closely associated with the Lake District. So the broader region that the Lake District is in is called Cumbria. And as you can see, it's kind of like, it's about as far northwest as you can go in England and still be in England, right? You go any further northwest and you are, well, I guess technically in the ocean. But once you walk across the beach, you're in Scotland, right? So Cumbria itself, right? Like you remember when we were talking about the Wye River Valley, which runs along here with the border with Wales, how the Wye River Valley is like described in Tintern Abbey as this area of natural beauty, even though it was actually heavily trafficked and heavily industrialized. Cumbria as a region was also heavily industrialized. The Lake District is kind of one of the last unspoiled spots of natural beauty within that region. Right. Cumbria is dominated by a region called Lancashire, which was well known for its coal, its steam-powered mills. But the Lake District, it's made up of like a number of like valleys, in which they were formed by glaciers, in which there's this water left behind these really beautiful lakes, and there's a lot of really kind of gorgeous. It's a really kind of picture postcard kind of place, right? So Coleridge, Wordsworth, and Robert Southey, who you may remember as the author of The Victory, and also the guy that Coleridge tried to start a cult with, come to be known as the Lake Poets. Right, because they all live in this district in the early 19th century. So, this is Alfoxden House, which the Wordsworths rented in 1797. And it still looks very much today like it would have at the time that they rented it. There's indoor plumbing now, but it's wired for electricity. But yeah, otherwise it is as much as they would have experienced it. And these are some pictures of Nether Stowey, the village outside of which Alfoxden House is situated. And again, many of these buildings are also quite old and date to the 18th century. The cars are modern. And this is Dove Cottage, where the Wordsworths lived in Grasmere. It now has one of those blue British Heritage plaques, that says William Wordsworth lived here from blah 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 to blah blah blah, and this is what he did. And these are just some shots of the village of Grasmere. You can see kind of like the beautiful hills and mountains in which it is situated. Whoever built this town really likes granite. Like this is a particularly lovely vista. All right. So there's your little tourist trip through the north of England. So, let's take a look at some of these other interactions between the siblings here. The ones that don't have anything to do with pretending they're dead, or getting fake married, or refusing to throw apples away. So, there's something I'm thinking that, well, for one thing, did you notice, by the way, what word Dorothy uses when William is working on a poem? What word she uses to describe it? I think we see a good example is page 412, the Sunday, October 12th entry. Can somebody read that for us, starting with Sate in the house?
Okay, sate in the house, writing in the morning, while William went into the wood to compose. Wrote to John in the morning, copied poems for the lyrical ballad. In the evening, wrote to Mrs. Rawson. Mary Jameson and Sally Ashburn dined. We boiled apples after dinner, a large basket full. We walked before tea by Van Riggs to observe the many-colored foliage. The oaks dark green with yellow leaves, the birches generally still green, some near the water, yellowish, the sycamore crimson and crimson tufted, the mountain ash a deep orange, the common ash lemon color, but many ashes still fresh in the peculiar green, those that were discolored chiefly near the water. William composing in the evening went to bed at 12 o'clock.
Okay, so I think what we're more at, like, apart from the lovely description of the autumn creeping slowly across Cumbria, right? Okay, that's, very nice. I think what we're most interested in here, or should be most interested in, are the beginning and end of the entry here. So how many different words for writing are used? Yeah, we've got 3 different words here for writing, right?
A copy, writing, and compose.
Yeah. And what's the difference, or what do we notice about the difference in how these words are applied? Who's composing? William is composing, right? What's Dorothy doing?
Copy.
Copying and writing, right? How does that suggest a difference in the way she's thinking about what she's doing and the way she's thinking about what he's doing?
What he's doing has greater importance than what she's doing.
Yeah, composing sounds more important, right?
Right.
Sounds a little more pompous. Well, why does the word composing suggest importance to us? What's the essential difference between composing and merely writing? Like, with what kinds of fields do we think that we're composing?
Usually music.
Yeah, music, right? We think of like a composer, right? It being not a musician, but somebody who writes music, right? So yeah, so composing is very much an art and music word. Right? It's involved in the creation of beautiful things. And by the music that I was playing at the beginning of class, just to link that up with what we're doing, Fanny Hensel was the sister of the famous German composer Felix Mendelssohn. And so, the reason I chose that is because we have 2 women from roughly the same era who, despite their own talents, are overshadowed by a more famous brother. But yeah, we use composing to talk about art and music. Writing and copying we think of as being kind of more mechanical, right? So she assigns to herself the less glorious kind of writing task. So writing is work. Not writing as art.
I mean, as codependent and creepy as the relationship is, I think I kind of feel for Dorothy in a way because she's reduced herself as well as her brother and the men around her have also reduced her to just someone to just do their the handiwork all the time, even though she's just even more so, probably more intelligent than they are. all the stuff that she wrote down, like you can just see it in their writing. So like she did most of the work. They just used her work.
Yeah, it's sometimes translated even almost like not translated, but lifted almost word for word, right? What she wrote into Wordsworth and Coleridge's poems.
Right. And I think she didn't. I mean, she did have time to do the journals and write down other stuff, but like it's almost she didn't get enough time to work on her own art because she was too busy working and writing down stuff for theirs. So yeah, kind of feel for her on that one.
And remember, like that, when we talk about so vocational philanthropy is we call it ideology, right? And I'm going to throw a little bit of Marxist critical theory at you. So ideology, or an ideology, is kind of like set of values that's adopted by the prevailing culture. Usually, they are the values of whoever the dominant class in society is that then kind of trickle down to everybody else, right? And there are these ideas that everybody just kind of accepts and takes for granted and rarely questions. Because you're basically brought up in it. You absorb it with your mother's milk. And so, Dorothy is basically getting this, not only, from other women around her, from the women who raise her, from neighbors, from, popular books, right, from representations of women in popular culture, right? So all of this stuff exerts a powerful shaping influence on a person. And it's a relatively, and at least, the way the theory goes, right, is it's a relatively rare person who actually kind of sits back, looks at this, and thinks like, wait a minute, this is bullshit. And starts sort of asking questions. Why? Now, there are a number of good reasons for this, and Dorothy would have a number of good reasons for not questioning her situation as well, right? She's an orphan, and she doesn't have any of her own money, and her odds of getting married are basically zilch. So, there aren't a lot of good reasons for her to openly question her subordinate position in the household to her brother, right? And this notion of vocational philanthropy. Now, one thing that is kind of interesting about the Wordsworths is that, kind of later in life, I think in her 40s, Dorothy has a mental and physical breakdown. And she becomes ill-tempered, mean, sometimes violent. And she continues to live in the Wordsworth household, until she dies. I think she outlives William. Yeah, but so I think there's I think that perhaps the dutiful sister finally the weight of all of those expectations, not to overly psychoanalyze, someone who died, more than a century before I was born, right? But I think that that having to play this role in William's household, and then just kind of being pushed off to the side, I think that probably took an immense psychological toll, and kind of knowing that her place was always going to be marginal in society generally. It doesn't seem surprising to me that she has a breakdown in middle age. All right, so since we started a little early, we're about out of time. Does anybody have any other observations they want to make or questions they want to ask about this?
At the end, close to the end, it's right before she does the entry about Christmas Eve. She goes on a walk with Mary, and this is like the first time she calls her sister, and she even capitalized. Yeah, so I found that interesting. I underlined sister.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know, I just found that interesting, like, because it seemed as though she was almost coming around to the idea of Mary, but maybe not fully, because, she's still being replaced.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
And she and Mary Hutchinson were friends before Mary
Right.
Hutchinson knew William. So she actually has the prior friendship claim there even as well. Yeah, but no, again, you're right. I think that, that's interesting. And I think like the walking thing as well is something she does with her brother,
With her brother,
right?
she's
That's
doing
something
it
that
with-
she and William do together. And I guess, including Mary in that. No, there's something there,
Yeah.
All right, anything else before I give you all the reading questions for Keats? I was looking ominous outside. Oh, it's raining. Oh, joy.
Great.
Well, I guess I'm not going anywhere. Good luck to all of you.
I brought an umbrella, so. Oh my gosh, that is like a downpour.
Yeah.
Right.
Hope nobody has any place they have to be immediately.
I do.
I do too.
Yeah, right.
Of course I do.
Yeah.